What do I think about gluten?
The gluten is the thing that allows the bubbles to be captured.
And I think gluten's one of those things that needs to be broken down.
If you don't have gluten, the air escapes. If you have gluten, the air is retained.
I think gluten is demonized a little bit too much.
I'm a huge supporter of gluten. That's because I like wheat, I like rye, I like barley, I like several different grains that contain gluten. But I think what one has to do is understand what gluten is, rather than seeing it as the enemy that makes people fat. That's absolutely false.
Trying to use it for giving structure to the bread.
So wheat is like the perfect grain for making bread so far.
I think that if you are using sourdough in long fermentation, it makes it much more digestible. You can see how much of the sourdough we go through. This is the rye sour that we used in the rye bread. You see how thick this is. We do this because we want more acid in it.
Sourdough baking, we actually digest most of it before the loaf is even baked.
So you can see that it has all of the parts of the grain. It's not just like they didn't take the bran out or anything. It's all whole grain. So you can still see the specks. It's not just like powdery flour with no taste.
Inside of a wheat kernel are two proteins, gliadin and glutenin. Now, they do not form gluten unless there is moisture and friction. So you mill, you break open the kernel, you've got flour. And right there's really not any gluten in the flour until you get it wet. When you get it wet and then you start to make friction, it forms, those two proteins come together to form the longer strand of protein, which is known as gluten.
I mean, gluten gets a very bad rap because of all the industrial bread that has been made just to make it quickly and to make more money, and it's just devoid of any kind of nutrition. Our sesame bread, that again, like the other one, it's fermented for a couple of days.
So that it's not going to be difficult on the system.
You can see here, just like the other bread I showed you, the Grantoft, how wet it is and how kind of gelatinous it is, but in a good way.
Now, if you're using slow fermentation, you're going to break down a lot of the complex carbohydrates, converting them into simpler sugars for your yeast and bacteria, your sourdough culture, to use as fuel and to consume. Now, in the process of consuming, the acidification, the higher acidity, increases. So not only are the enzymes that are active during that period of time breaking down some of the proteins, but also the higher acidity will break down some of the proteins.
Because if you just use the gluten and don't break it down or digest it, for some people it can be very difficult to digest, and they don't even have to be celiac.
I mean, I'm not a physician, I'm not a nutritionist, but I think that if you take special care, you add a lot of water to your dough and you make sourdough, I don't think it's anything that can't be enjoyed in moderation, of course, you know.
If you have some fear of gluten, then you should know that sourdough is in fact the route to go to minimize the amount of gluten that's in your bread.
We need to take our time and go slow, like a ruminant.
So often when you're dealing with a really well-made sourdough, it's actually not going to be a very tall loaf because the gluten has been broken down.
Slow fermentation, the sourdough, as I told you before, has lots of enzymes in it. It's going to break these things down.
Do I think gluten is healthy or unhealthy? I am neutral. I think that well-made bread is very healthy.